information, in particular sharing experiences between the country offices and also trying to raise the profile of cats globally. And my work here in New York and also at the country office level, I've really been able to see firsthand the impact that good documentation can have on a program. Not just a CATS program, but a WASH program in general. So in terms of program advocacy, if you're to get new partners on board, if you're wanting to create competition between implementing partners, between communities, and also if you're wanting to raise and sustain funds, good documentation is an absolute must. We've decided to do this web action today because we often get asked to give advice in New York about how country officers can improve the quality of their CATS documentation. And I just say, you don't have to be an amazing photographer, you don't have to be an amazing writer necessarily in order to be good at documentation. There are some very simple tricks and rules that you can follow in order to improve the quality of your writing quite a lot. So today's session, hopefully, we'll be able to give you some practical tips. Not your CATS program, but for other aspects of WASH programming, other aspects of UNICEF programming too, hopefully. Because time's limited, I've specifically chosen to focus on human interest stories, but all a little bit on innovation documentation, because these are the two things that donors ask for a lot. They're what's most useful in terms of documentation internally, and they're simple to do effectively. So I want the session to be really participatory, so if you have any questions or comments as we go along, please use the chat box, and also I'll also stop at the presentation, so you can also raise your hand if you have any experiences you want to share or any comments you want to add. Okay, with that I think we'll get started. Talking a little bit about why CATS documentation is so important. Obviously it's important both internally and externally. I'll just give you a quick example of a country office that has done fantastic documentation. That's Sierra Leone. They started documenting CATS very early on in their program, and they started doing a newsletter which was actually called the WASH newsletter, but it focused predominantly on CATS, and it was used as a way of sharing information both at the community level, between implementing partners, district level government partners, and also at the ministry level as well. And I can see here Sierra Leone would graph progress by region of the country. They would also graph progress by implementing partner on a quarterly basis, and this really helped to promote competition. It would also feature articles from prominent individuals, including government leaders, who would give advice on how to overcome certain challenges relating to CATS. And this was really motivational, particularly for people working in the district governments, but for communities and implementing partners also. The newsletter would also give credit to prominent natural leaders, or people that had done a great job in terms of leading CATS within the community. These individuals had gone above and beyond what was expected of them and had spread CATS to neighbouring communities, for example. So it was a great way of helping to generate pride and give credit to those people that were making an effort to improve sanitation. It also helped document innovations. So you can see down here there's some really good examples of toilets and hand washing facilities, and also documentation of how communities overcame certain challenges, so for example flooding, hard rock, etc. So a great concise way of documenting progress in CATS, and it was something that could be shared with communities, implementing partners and donors also. And it's been done in many countries around the world, not just in Sierra Leone, so we also have examples from Nigeria, Malawi. I know there's a lot of great stuff going on in ROSA and IAPRO, Plus, at the global level, we have Toilet Talk, which is a way of showcasing what's happening at the country level. Okay, so what a human interest story? I think most of you probably know what a human interest story is, but basically it focuses on a project positive impact, how this affects a person or a community. Human interest stories are great because they really help share experiences in the promotion of cats, both internally and externally, as just discussed. And the trick with a human interest story is to appeal to a person's heart and their head at the same time. If you're a donor in particular, it's really important that you can engage with the person that you're reading about. It's to know a little bit about the person, for example, their age, where they're from, do they have a family, if it's a child, do they go to school, because this really makes the reader feel like they've gotten to know the person. But at the same time, it's also important for a human interest story to be informative, so to teach the reader something new, whether it's about a new innovation, a new approach, or it might be cats in general. You know, a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with the approach, so it's a great way of sharing information with them. So, a good human interest story will always be inspiring, whether it's inspiring other communities to adopt cats, whether it's inspiring donors to donate funds to the cats approach. It's informative, it will talk about what exactly the project is, what are the facts and figures involved with cats, not just in the community but at the country level too. It's always positive, it will always talk about how people's lives have been changed as a result of cats. There's no negativity, there's nothing mentioned about extreme poverty or shame or anything like that. It always should be positive. It should all be short. One of the biggest problems we find with human interest stories that are submitted to us here in New York is that they tend to be a little bit too long, so that if you have a human interest story that's 2 or 3 pages long, most people, especially donors, will just not have time to read the whole thing. So you have a short 1-page document that's concise, a good photograph there. It will really help encourage people to read the whole story. And also, another issue that we often find with human interest stories, they're a little bit too technical, so they'll use too much cats jargon and be a little bit too heavy for somebody who doesn't necessarily know about the CATS program to understand effectively. So always try and keep it simple. Two basic types of human interest stories. There is what is known as a success story. First of all, which basically is great for an external audience in particular, and talk about who was involved. In the case of CATS, who was involved in the CATS program, what did the CATS program involved, when did it happen, where did it happen, why did it happen, what was the problem that was being addressed, and also how did it happen. And then the other type of human interest story is a learning story, and this may be more appropriate for an internal audience. It's a great way of sharing experiences. So how did a community respond to a challenge? Were any particular designs, innovations involved? How and why did the innovation take place? What was learned from the experience in this particular community? And actually, a human interest story doesn't have to be a success story or a learning story. The best ones actually combine both aspects. And it actually saves you a lot of time and effort if you can use one human interest story, not just for an external audience, but for an internal audience as well. Later about how you can do this effectively. So of course, different audiences often require something a bit different from a human interest story. So for example, communities may want to hear about the experience of other communities. The leaders, often they're most interested in hearing about other natural leaders and how they've overcome particular challenges. The same with CATS facilitators. The partners may want to hear about what other implementing partners are doing in other districts, and this way it can really help promote competition. The same with district governments. They want to hear perhaps what government officials in other districts are doing, how they've overcome particular challenges. At ministry level, they're probably interested to hear about everything from the communities to the leaders to the implementing partners, etc. And then for the donors and international audience, from experience, I think a lot of donors specifically want to hear about how the project has impacted one particular person, in particular women and children. They really, really appeal to donors. UNICEF, this is something that we really should be concentrating on. When I do this training in person, we tend to do like an audience segmentation exercise, and this is really great for planning in terms of documentation. So if you think of the major audiences that you're trying to target within your country, whether it's the communities or the government, as just discussed, and then in chart, so the purpose of the stories, the focus of the stories, the tone of the stories, and also how they can be packaged for different audiences. It will really help you plan your documentation. Okay, just talk quickly a little bit about documentation, document innovations. So what is an innovation? I'm sure most of you know already. So it's something that is either new or different. So for example, a new technology, it may be a new style of latrine, for example. It may be a new design of VIP latrine. It may be a new T-tap or another type of hand washing facility. It may be a new triggering approach. For example, Malawi has recently developed something which is known as shit and shake, with a new triggering method which helps promote hand washing with soap during triggering. It may be a new style of CATS. For example, some CATS programs now also include a health component. Perhaps there's also a HIV triggering aspect to the CATS approach. This is something new and interesting that people both within the country and internationally can learn about, inspiration from. So why document innovations? It's similar to documenting human stories. So it's a way of sharing progress and information. It's a really great way of inspiring and creating competition, and also encouraging further innovations. So for example, in one region, some community has developed a fantastic toilet design. Perhaps somebody in a neighbouring district will think, oh wow, that's great, but you know, we can do one better than that. So it really helps stimulate competition, and in doing this, really help you strengthen and scale up your CATS program. So documenting innovations, again, this is an example from Sierra Leone. Basically, this was an innovation that involved a tippy tap, and it basically had two pipes and was made from local recycled materials, including bamboo and a rubber tire. Basically, the way this was documented was really great because there was a diagram which showed all the different components of the washing station with labels explaining the materials that were used. And the person that actually designed the facility is featured, so this is great for him in terms of pride and also stimulating competition between communities. And there's a picture in how exactly the innovation is used. So how do you fill it up with water, etc. So this is a really great example. So information is required to document innovations. So it's really important to give credit to the person who designed it. When was the innovation designed? Give the name of the community. Why was it designed? Was there a particular challenge that the person was trying to overcome? Explain how the innovation works and also the materials used. Okay, collecting human interest stories. I'm sure quite a few of you do this already as part of your routine monitoring and documentation activities, but I'll just give you a few tips on how to do it. So, how do you select a good community, family or person to interview? Not every person will make a good human interest story. So just remember, a good human interest story shows how people's lives have been changed as a result of CATS. So you really need to show a person that can show the project's impact, someone who can explain what life was like before and after CATS, somebody who's perhaps confident in speaking to you, somebody who can take a great photograph, somebody who's self-reliant or empowered by the project is always great. This is something that donors and external audiences all like to hear about. Or somebody perhaps who's had a positive impact on the community through CAT. Perhaps it's a really good chief or an excellent natural leader. These always make great human interest stories. You can interview mothers, fathers, children, community leaders, natural leaders as just discussed. Perhaps you want to speak with someone from a women's group or health club. You can speak with the local health staff. Actually, you can interview several of these people within a community. Try and do a transcript of what each person says, but when it comes to writing the human interest story, it's often best to focus on just one person and then make the majority of the story about this one person. And then perhaps if you get a good quote from somebody else, you can use this quote to back up what the person has said. So for example, you have a mother talking about how her children's diarrhea has reduced as a result of CATS. You can then maybe get a quote from local health staff, health club members who can back up what she's saying. So this makes a really great human interest story. If you start involving like 3 or 4 different people and different quotes, it gets a bit confusing for the reader to follow who the quote's coming from, etc. So it's best to try and keep it really simple. And to focus on perhaps who has the best latrine and hand washing facilities. When choosing a natural leader, who has been the most prominent, perhaps who built the latrine first, which householders overcome the big challenges, perhaps there's somebody living with a disability, and maybe the other community members rallied round to really help that person construct their own facilities. So it makes a really great human interest story. An example where children have really helped take the lead, for example through FLTS or as part of the school health club, and which natural leaders and local government officials have been most dynamic. So in doing interviews, there are 2 types of questions that you can ask people. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this already, but if you're trying to do a free kind of open interview, the best type of questions to ask people are actually open-ended questions. So this is a closed-ended question, which can usually only be answered with yes or no, or a very short answer. And in terms of getting quotes, this isn't so great. It's good for getting basic information. For example, are you a natural leader? How old are you? Do you go to school, etc.? But in terms of getting a free, open and more detailed response, it's not great. So you ask questions like, what was your community like before CATS began? For example, why did you decide to construct a latrine? Have there been any challenges that you've overcome? Why did you decide to become a natural leader? Questions like that are really great at getting a detailed response. So Sue, just ask, maybe get this PowerPoint after the session. Yep, soon I'm going to circulate it after the web is finished, so don't worry, you'll get a copy of that. And all the training materials, including a more detailed version, are available on the intranet page. So stories will be circulated. Okay, in terms of writing a human interest story, remember before you start, the base of a good human interest story actually should always be a picture. Because even if you get the best quotes from an interview, if you have a bad picture, people aren't necessarily going to read your human interest story. So you've got a great picture with great lighting, the picture's positive and happy, and it really shows a good example. Abilities. This makes the absolute best human interest story. So, as mentioned before, always try and use simple language too. Not too much CAT jargon. Just remember, not everybody knows what a natural leader is necessarily. Not everybody knows what triggering means or open defecation free means. So try and explain it in very simple terms. Also, make sure you include the basic facts of the story. So if you're talking about a person, maybe you talk about their age, about if they have family, if it's a child, do they go to school. Perhaps what do they want to do when they finish school? One of the biggest issues we have with some of the human interest stories we receive here in New York is that they lack quotes. So quotes are an absolute must. Don't just talk about what you saw in the community, give direct quotes from the person. Or name partners or the local government. Give credit where credit's due. So if, for example, Oxfam is helping you implement in a certain district, make sure you mention them. Don't over-dramatize or turn the interviewee into a victim. And if you're in about this, try and put yourself in the reader's shoes or the shoes of the person you've been interviewing. Would they feel proud if they heard this story? Because always try and represent the truth and try and generate pride whilst doing these stories, because that's the ultimate aim. So, as mentioned before, the story should always be focused, so one child, one family, etc. And also, I mentioned also, put yourself as the reader. Would you find this story interesting? Would you understand it? If you know anything about cats, or if your English wasn't so great, could you still understand it? It's a really good test about how good your story is. Okay, there's a really simple structure that we use here at UNICEF for writing a human interest story. And this is something used by Communication. And if you have a look on the UNICEF website, you can see that every single story, whether it's WASH, education, health, they use the exact same structure. And it makes it a lot simpler to write a story. So, we have the issue, which is usually the first paragraph of 2, which talks about who the story involves, where the story took place, what person or community liked before cats or another WASH intervention came. The second or third paragraph will often talk about the action. So, what project exactly, a brief description of the CATS program, how was it implemented, how was the person involved in the human interest story specifically involved in the action? So how were they a part of CATS and what did they do? The impact, so how did this program impact the person's life? Did they see a reduction in diarrhea as their children? Did it help them feel proud about the sanitation situation? Did it mean they can now sit outside without having a bad smell in the evening? Are the flies? I mean, lots of things like this. So pull out the impact from the interview that you've already done. And then actually the conclusion, which people often tend to forget, is actually one of the most important things. It's the final paragraph. So it's always good to try and end with a positive quote, if possible trying to relate to the bigger picture within the country. So maybe you can include some facts. And we'll just go through these paragraphs in a little bit more detail. And I'll use an example. Declarative sentences throughout your story. So not too much detail. So for example, the triggering procedure carried out by the community facilitator allowed the community to be sensitized, which meant they could construct and rehabilitate their sanitation and hygiene facilities. For somebody that doesn't know about cats and for somebody that doesn't speak English or whatever other language is their first language, they may not understand this sentence. Also, it's a little bit long. So a really good alternative to this sentence would be, through use of shocking demonstrations known as triggering, the facilitator inspired families to construct their own toilets and hand washing facilities. A much clearer and concise way of writing the same sentence. So try and remember this when you're writing your human interest story. So this paragraph, as discussed before, should always talk about the issue at hand. And the very first paragraph is probably the most important because this is the paragraph that really gets the reader to read the rest of the story. And basically they'll want to read the rest of the story if they feel that they can really get to know the person or the family involved in the story. So you should really introduce the person, set the scene, maybe give a brief description of the person. So for example, Hassan is 13 and he lives in Majengo, a town in Western Sierra Leone. He's a student and he takes his education very seriously. Immediately we know something a little bit about Hassan. So tonight I take my books out and I study for many hours. Hassan wants to study to become a doctor and says candidly, if someone is sick and I am a doctor, they could be brought to me and I would be able to cure them. So this sets a very positive tone to the story and really gets people to want to know more about Hassan. The issue paragraph would also talk about where the story is set and what was the sanitation situation like before cats came. So for example, Majengo is a village in western Sierra Leone. It's 100 miles from the nearest town and 10 miles from the nearest health centre. And recently most households did not have access to their own toilet and illnesses such as diarrhoea were common. So a little bit about the health situation. But this little paragraph or two can also talk a little bit maybe about national statistics or local statistics. For example, Majengo is similar to many other communities across the country. Just 13% of Sierra Leoneans have access to improved sanitation, with 28% of the population having to practice open defecation, which emanates fields, forests and water sources. So it includes some of the statistics, which is also great. So as mentioned before, always try and use quotes. Just remember that a good quote is short, it's concise, and it's always relevant to the paragraph that you've just written. So, this is where I want you to give input. If you can just type in the chat box which of these quotes you think most matches the paragraph above, which I'll read out to you. So, until recently, most households in Majengo did not have access to their own toilet, and illnesses such as diarrhoea were common. Hassan 13, a student, explains, A, I like to study and want to become a doctor. B, before cats, many people used to practice open defecation. I get diarrhoea all the time and I miss so much school. C, I've really enjoyed being a part of the school health club. It taught me so much about sanitation and hygiene. Or D, before cats, everyone used to practice open defecation, even the chief and my father. So just type in the chat box A, B, C or D, whichever one you think is most appropriate to that sentence. Osho and Ahmed are saying B. Chime B. Else? I'm saying C. David saying B also. Okay, everyone that said B, well done. Actually, D is also a possibility, but can anyone tell me what's wrong with D? Just type in the chat box. A is also a very good quote, but it might not be the best for this particular sentence. That's why D's an issue. Okay, I was saying it did not tell the issue enough. Yeah, to some extent. Ending with the reference to the chief and Hassan's father. Yeah, that's correct, Abdullah. Yeah, it's definitely pointing fingers at individuals. So, I mentioned before about putting yourself in the interview shoes. How do you think Hassan's father or the chief of that community would feel if they realised that their open defecation practices were being advertised to the whole country and perhaps the whole world? They'd probably be really embarrassed. So, remember, it's always about dignity and pride and try not to point fingers. And even Hassan said this, those things that you can edit out and try and choose alternative quotes from the notes that you've made. So the second section of your human interest story is the action. So we talk about when, what and how CATS took place. Try and explain what CATS is, very simple terms. How was the particular person involved? Why did they decide to get involved? Try and back this up with quotes. With challenges that they overcame. So for example, if you're talking about a natural leader, were there any stubborn individuals within that community? How to address this situation? And try and pick 1 to 2 quotes from your interview for this paragraph and try and keep them as short as possible. They only have to be a line each, but just make sure they're concise and they're relevant to the previous sentence as just discussed. So the third section, or the third paragraph, talks about the impact. So what was the impact on the person, the family or the community? Do you have any other impact besides improved sanitation? So, for example, in some communities, they might be so mobilised as a result of CATS, they may decide to build a road or come together to rehabilitate a water point, for example. Did it inspire any other communities? So, for example, if there was an ODS ceremony, did this inspire neighbouring communities to also begin the CATS process? And a good example of this, a good paragraph would be, as an active member of the school health club, Hassan worked with his teachers to help encourage his community to build their own toilets. I had a teacher, Mr. Conte, with the food and feces demonstrations, which really helped people to link between open defecation and disease. Following these demonstrations, families began to immediately construct latrines. So this is really simple and concise paragraph, which really documents the impact well. So, as mentioned before, getting quotes from the chief, health workers, local government officials, or other family or community members can be really used to back up statements made by other individuals within the community. For example, David Bumbu, chief of Majengo, agrees that since CATS, the village has become a cleaner and healthier place. Following the triggering, the community really came together to make sure everyone had access to their own toilet. People also practice good hand washing now. I've really noticed a reduction in diarrhea and other diseases. So this really supports what Hassan was saying previously. You can go on to talk about how the of Majengo relates to the bigger picture. So, for example, Majengo is just one of 2,991 communities that have been declared open defecation free across the country. And since the programme commenced last year, more than 640,000 people are now living in ODF communities as a result of CATS. So this is great, particularly for donors, because it really helps them see the scale of the programme and it makes them really want to invest in CATS as a programme. And it's also great information for all audiences as well. Maybe they don't necessarily know the scale of the programme. So the conclusion, so make it strong and always try and end with a positive quote. So the example here is, Hassan is very proud of what his school health club has achieved so far. It's great to know that we helped play a part in ensuring our community became open defecation free. That we can continue promoting good health messages within our community and also go on to inspire neighbouring villages to become open defecation free like Majengo. So again, it's really positive and it really kind of shows how even just one community, it's had a positive impact on neighbouring communities. And something that government, whether it's at the national level or the international level, they really like to hear about this. So always try and include it in your story. Are there any questions or comments? Does anyone want to share any experiences? If so, use the chat box or raise your hand. if there's no questions or comments, or we just mentioned interviewing children, any special protocols that need to be followed. Yes, ID should always speak to their parents and just let them know exactly what the stories will be used for. I try and back up what the children are saying, perhaps with information from the parents or the teachers, so you know that the information is correct. Okay, Arnold, I'm not quite finished yet. I'm just going to talk for about 10-15 minutes about photography, how you can take a really good WASH photograph. Not just about cats, it's for WASH and I guess other UNICEF programs in general, so hopefully I can give you some good tips. Okay, Juan from India saying covering all cats principles are necessary. Can you elaborate a bit, Juan? I think, do you mean in the story itself? You don't need to go all the principles and exactly how it's implemented, but just kind of explain that there's a process where the community decides to construct their own latrines based on what they've seen during the demonstrations. So just do one sentence, you can really explain what CATS is effectively. You don't need to go into too much detail. Okay, so this should be a little bit lighter. So I need your guys' inputs on this, so please chat box. So quickly, a good photograph, in particular, is simple, just like human interest story, so it shouldn't be too busy, so there shouldn't be too much going on in the photograph. It's used to enforce pride, and it's a really good opportunity to let community show off their latrines. And even if you don't use the photo in the human interest story, it's a really good technique when monitoring to make people really feel proud about what they've done and the facilities that they've constructed. A good photograph should be informative. So who and what do you want to show in the picture? Try not to just show the person, always show the facility in the background or the in if possible. A good photograph is always balanced with good lighting, and a good photograph is always positive. This is super important, particularly for an external audience. Because I know culturally in some countries, a serious photo is the norm, but for an external audience, they really respond well, donors in particular, to a really happy, positive photograph, because people want to know that their support will help to change people's lives and create positivity. That's what donors want. So there's actually tricks you can do to make people smile in photographs. You don't necessarily need to be able to speak the same language as people, but if you can engage somehow, perhaps you can take a photograph of them, and even if they're serious in the first photograph, just by showing them on your digital camera their picture, this often can get people to really smile, and then you can take a quick picture, and often those pictures are the best photos. So just a little tip for you there. So before starting, just like interviewing for a human interest story, ideally you should always ask permission. In fact, you'd always ask permission without fail, and explain to the person exactly what the photo is being used for. Explain to them that you may be using it for a newsletter, an article. Explain to them that a lot of people are likely to see it within the country and perhaps internationally as well. So try and create a comfortable atmosphere, as just mentioned. Just try and pick a good location. So try and show the facilities where possible, or if you're documenting the triggering, try and get a good vantage point so you can see exactly what's going on. Some digital cameras often automatically put the date stamp on, so try and change your settings to make sure this doesn't happen, because it can really spoil a photograph. Make sure the photographs are high resolution. In New York, unfortunately we're not able to use some photos that we receive because they're not high enough resolution, and this is super important, particularly for websites, or if photographs and documentation is to be used in publications. We always need high quality, colourful, positive photographs for this. Don't forget you can use your camera both vertically and horizontally. Most people use their camera horizontally, but actually vertically is often a really good way of doing things, particularly if you're taking a portrait photograph of somebody for a human interest story. Editing as well, sometimes it's a shame we see such great photographs, you know, where the person's smiling, the photograph's informative, it's fantastic, but if the lighting's off, due to the photograph perhaps being taken in the afternoon when the sun is very strong, it can really throw everything off. So one way to get around this is to really try and take photographs early in the morning or late in the afternoon when the sun isn't too strong, or try and get the person to stand a little bit in the shade, perhaps under a tree, or you can also use the flash if the overhead lighting is too strong. So this is one way of getting around it. So you use the flash, try and stand back a little bit so the bounce of the light off the person isn't too strong. That's another good tip. So photo composition techniques, so simpler is always best. So try and keep it to one object, so one family, one person, one scene. Photos are a really good example because it shows a husband and wife. This is actually from Malawi. It quite clearly shows the latrine in the background. There's some washing all line above, which I don't think it makes the photo cluttered. I think it's quite interesting and it adds a little bit of colour. And it also shows that the people are going about their daily lives, which is always good. The thing about this photo is it quite clearly has a foreground and a background. So foreground is the people, the object that is closest to you. So in this case, it's the people, and the background is obviously the latrine. So always try and get as close as you can to the object in the foreground, and this makes sure that the resolution of the photo is as high as possible. And also try and provide copies of the photos to people where possible. I know it's not always easy to do that, but even if you can just provide a printout of the story, it can really generate pride, and also it's a good thing to do in terms of ethics. So, just in the chat box, can you just type which of these photos you prefer, A or B, and just explain why in a couple of words? So what is best, the first one or the second one? Okay, Ada in the second because it's eye-catching. Yeah. Okay, so, yeah, Gabriel's saying the second. Any first one best? Second one, lots of happy faces. Okay, everyone's saying the second one. That's right. Because even though the first one's actually quite a nice photograph, there's too much going on in there. And I actually know this because I took the photograph. And what happened was everybody wanted to get in on the photo. Whilst it's quite a cute photograph, you know, it's a bit cluttered. And actually this story was about the chief, but there's so many people in the photograph, it's not so obvious the story's about him. The second photograph is better because, again, smiley faces, it's just focusing on one family, and you can quite clearly see the latrine in the background, whereas on the other photograph, the facility's obscured and it's not necessarily clear whether that's a toilet or a house, and it's not so clear to the reader. Okay, is that saying the first one because all the people in the community are happy? Yeah. I mean, the first one's also, without my own horn, is also a good photograph because people are smiling. So, I'll keep it positive, yeah. Okay, which of the photos is best for this one? The chat box, A or B, and just explain why. In saying the second one, smiling faces. Is there anything else about this photo that's made better than the first one? Saying the latrine in the background. Yeah. Is there anything about the second photograph that could be improved a little bit?
It's okay.
In the resolution, I don't know. I think the resolution's okay, and I think the camera was actually on a setting where it's really focused in on the foregrounds of the people. The background was a little blurred out, and photographers like to do this sometimes because it's a little bit artistic. The children hidden. Yeah, maybe you could see a little bit more of the children. One of the issues with this is, unfortunately, the girl isn't looking directly at the camera. So even though the smaller baby is, this could be strengthened if the girl was looking at the camera. What I also like about this is you can quite clearly see the hand washing pot in the background as well, which also adds a little bit of something, and you can see what the community looks like as well. Okay, the second photograph is obviously a lot more positive than the first one, and the quality of the toilet is also a lot higher. This one, even the structure's not too bad. I think the door looks a little bit messy, so it could have been a better toilet, or it could have been a better example for the human interest story. Which of these photographs is better? Specifically for a human interest story in this situation. David M.B. Okay, then, yeah, that's right. So even though A is quite a good photograph of the actual toilet itself, and it quite clearly shows it's a VIP latrine with a vent pipe. It's not great in terms of a human interest story because there are no humans in the picture. It's not to say necessarily that this can't be used in a story, but it would be better if you perhaps had some people standing in the foreground, or perhaps you could back this photograph up with another photograph, perhaps of the people involved in the human interest story, perhaps a photo of them involved in the triggering or washing their hands with the hand washing facility. Yeah, it's always better to show the photograph because it suggests that the toilet's being used, as Ahmed has just said. If you have people stood next to the facilities, it really helps enforce community pride as well. I think it's pretty obvious which one of these photos is better, but to explain why you think Liz in the chat box, that'd be great. So just what the third picture represents, if you don't know anything about cats, it's not necessarily clear that this is in fact a tippy tap. Okay, saying B as a child practicing hand washing, yeah, definitely. So this one's a poor resolution photo, it's not clear what it is, and the second one, yeah, those are using the tippy tap, which is great. Okay, these photos is best and why? Great, yep, you've hit the nail on the head. Shows the photograph show, the second one shows, sorry, it's a shame, and actually, in terms of ethics, we can't really show pictures of children defecating in the open. It's a shameful photograph, and I'm sure the little boy's parents would be quite horrified to know that a picture of their son is being broadcast around the world. The second one is much more positive. It quite clearly shows the facilities that have come out of the CATS process, and also the lighting is much better in this, and you can quite clearly see the hand washing facility. So, yeah. Okay, I'm not sure if anybody knows about this. There is something which is called the rule of thirds, and it's a trick that's used by all photographers in the world. And actually, a lot of modern digital cameras now have an option to put a grid on the screen. And basically, this is trying to help you set up your photograph. And basically, the rule of thirds divides the photograph into 9 equal parts. And by positioning the subject in certain parts of the photograph, it makes the picture much more interesting. I'll demonstrate. If you divide it up into equal parts, or equal-ish parts, sorry, I think my lines are a little bit off on this, but I've divided it up into 10 sections. You can clearly see the main focus of this photograph are the adults and also to some extent the children. Their faces fall right in this region of the photograph. So just taking a photograph of one person, you should always aim to have their face as part of the photograph, or part here. Because often what we see with a lot of photographs is people try and put the person right in the middle of the photograph, or they put it here, which actually is not great in terms of photography techniques, and you'll really find a professional photographer that does that. So to make your photographs more professional, always aim to have the faces or the main subject of your photograph in this area of the photograph. Well, is shown on this photograph also. So even though the facilities are at a bit of an angle, it's actually done quite artistically because you can see the toilets in the background, you can see the hand washing, there's a child in the foreground and also in the background, and there's a lot of use of the facilities going on, so it's a great photograph. But again, you can see the children's faces are in the top third of the photograph. Keeping this in mind, which of these photographs do you think are the best? It can be 1, it can be 2, it can be all 3. Which photographs are best and why? Just use the chat box. Okay, do I say number 3? Someone else? And 1? Same one. Number 2. David say number 2. Aidan in 1. Okay. Actually, there are 2 answers to this. A and C are actually the best photographs in this situation, because if we put the grid photograph as just discussed, where the faces are, photograph, your faces are in the top third. In the photograph, even though the first girl is in the right place, the second girl is right in the middle. In addition, her head's been chopped off a little bit, which is a shame. In the photograph, because so this girl's face is in the top third, but also okay to use the bottom third of the photograph as well, which is also really good. As long as it's not in the middle, that's good. So try and get it on the axes. Any of these 4 axes is a great place to put the faces, or if you're just taking a photograph of a latrine or a hand washing facility, if you're documenting it as part of an innovation article, put the innovation also on these axes. What's wrong with this picture? There isn't wrong with it. If you can just type in the chat box. Simbu, based on what we've just said, the person is right in the middle of the photograph, which isn't good. Else? Very young mother. Yeah, quite young. Your child is not looking at the camera, unfortunately. How could you get the child to look at the camera? I don't know, you can make a noise, maybe rattle something. This is a great way of getting the kid to smile and look at you. Yeah, Louise is saying it's too close to see that it's a latrine. And even though there's a tippy tap in the picture, it's not obvious what it is necessarily. Yeah, so they're saying trying to attract the attention of the child. Yeah, and also that the photograph's a bit dark and the resolution isn't so great. A shame. So this could have been improved by moving photographer to the right and putting the girl to the left or right. So editing photographs. So if you take a photograph in the field and you get back to the office and you notice the lighting's a little bit off, you can quite easily edit this. Even like a Word or PowerPoint document page, you can do it also in Microsoft Office, I think it is. There are several very simple programs you can use to alter the light. So anyone tell me what's wrong with this particular photograph? David's saying it's a little crowded. Yeah, David. Actually, it is a little crowded, but this shows one family. Dark. The lighting's not so bad on this one. Maybe the image could be a little bit clearer, but I mean, what I like about this photograph is you can see the toilet in the background. You can quite clearly see CLTS. The tippy tap to the left-hand side of the picture here could have been made a bit clearer. Okay, I'll tell you. Actually, if you look at the little boy on the right-hand side, not wearing a top, and from a UNICEF ethics point of view, we can't really feature children who aren't fully clothed in our pictures. And also in terms of dignity, this isn't great for the boy, and I'm sure his parents wouldn't be too happy to see him this. So this, even though it's a great photograph, you can photograph and actually the right-hand side, and also remove a little bit on the left as well. So the other boy's head, who is just coming into the photo, some of that is removed as well. So there's really simple editing techniques that you can do to improve the quality of your photograph. So has anyone got any questions, or do they want to share any of their experiences in terms of documentation with the rest of the group? If so, just raise your hand or use the chat box. Okay, Brett, go ahead. You're able to open his microphone?
Hello?
I can hear you.
I have a question around the picture of the open defecation. I understand your point of the ethics. Our experience here in India is that the majority of people practice open defecation, but to that issue, it remains a bit of an issue of theoretical, abstract, and kind of technical in terms of toilets. And by kind of raising the issue of open defecation and to really make it very explicit what the problem is, we found that to be a very kind of strong way. Like when we show pictures of open defecation or shit in open stakeholders here, it really gives only a vibration that it's not some theoretical story we're telling. So I'm kind of wondering how that kind of then relates to the message of the ethics and the privacy. So we find it to be very strong to use that.
Okay, Brett, thank you. I mean, something like that, I think, could possibly be used maybe as a triggering tool, something that the natural leader could perhaps show to communities to really get them to think about their open defecation situation. But in terms of a human interest story, I don't think it's so useful. It really kind of promotes like shame and undermines the dignity of the child in question. And this is particularly the case for an international audience. It's something that UNICEF would actively promote or share, I think. And also, I think you have to think about the dignity of the family and the child. I don't think it's something that the family would be particularly happy with. So obviously, cats, it's all about pride and dignity, and it shouldn't be about shame at all. So this is something that we're really trying to convey, particularly in human interest stories, which, as I mentioned early on, should always be positive, no matter what. But like I said, it can always be used as a triggering tool, perhaps. Does anyone else have any questions or anything they want to add? Okay, so just in conclusion, CATS documentation, it's really vital from an advocacy point of view in terms of fundraising, in terms of getting new funds for your program, and also sustaining funds in terms of donor reporting. It's also absolutely vital in terms of promoting competition internally and generating pride, and this is really important, particularly at the start of any CATS program. It really helps to get the ball rolling. So remember, just keep it simple, keep it positive, and always have a great photograph. If you need any further guidance, please just feel free to send me an email, drop me a line, and I'll try and help you out in whichever way I can. So all the materials can be found on the intranet page, along with a lot of other CATS documentation. And actually, we're just finalising Toilet Talk now, so if anyone has any additional stories they want to send to me, or photographs, any latrines that they feel can be nominated for Star Latrine, the same for hand washing facilities, please do get in touch within the next couple of days and we'll feature your stories and documentation. So a big thank you to everyone. Have a good day.